You might have heard those if you met my dad. Eric, I have to give for public speaking. But thank you all for coming, and as Lynn said, remember 90% of helping is just showing up. I'm Steve, Jim's youngest son. I'm not sure if you know this, but my dad loved funerals and he loved grief. I know this sounds weird, but if you ever saw my dad reading a book his whole life, it was about grief. His favorite Bible verse for a long time even was Jesus wept, because he thought it was so important to grieve. I think his favorite sermon, and I bet I heard this about 20 times, is turn your garbage into gold. Not too many pastors have preached about compost. He also had a sermon about the boll weevil, which was a nasty little insect. A nasty little insect that killed the cotton industry, but now has a statue to it. He had a joke for every occasion. Most of those jokes were pretty bad, and we heard them many, many times. But hopefully we will laugh a lot today too, because that's part of the healing. Even in his last couple days, but literally the last words he said to me, the night before he died, I was holding him up and trying to get him back into bed. And he said, "Hey, it's going to be okay, Dad." He responded, "Famous last words." And those were his last words. And he said that famous last words. That was one of his favorite lines. It seemed a little bit insignificant or unimportant, but to me, and I think a lot of you who knew him, he loved that line. Some of you in the newcomers, I'm sure you've heard him talk about it. You got to name the elephant in the room. But he was big, 6'6" to be exact, and he loved it. Ironically, he was afraid of heights and would sometimes joke, "I'm even afraid to stand up." "How tall are you? Did you play basketball?" You might reply, "Yes. Do you play mini golf?" Said to a man over 6'2", but under 6'6", "Hey, little guy." For him, effort. But he started small. He was born in Hills, Minnesota, which even today only has a population of 600. But when he was 2 weeks old, his mom, dad, and his big brother Wood loaded up the truck. Childhood and all kinds of adventures with his big brother Wood. Smoking under the church, riding bikes down the riverbed, raising bunnies, watching the World War II planes fly over. And many of you have heard a sad story about losing his white football. But if there's one thing I missed the most was his big brother Wood. I'm so glad they're hanging out again. In Holland, Michigan, he quickly became the BMOC, the big man on campus, as a basketball player at Holland Christian High School and Calvin College. In basketball, but sometimes basketball was also the source of some tall tales, I think. His favorite was about the NBA. The story goes, "I could have played in the NBA, but my dad dashed that dream because he told me I wouldn't be allowed to play on Sundays." Of course, later in life, he added tennis to that story too. He did actually play some semi-pro basketball, and in one game in Philadelphia, when he was in seminary there, his favorite story was playing against a guy who played football for the Philadelphia Eagles. And after Dad attempted an ill-advised elbow to the stomach, the guy retaliated with a fist to Dad's face. He had a big appetite, and this is a strange one to add, but a number of people have mentioned this to me in the family. And it wasn't that he ate that much, but he would get so hungry. More than one of us can remember a time where we sat in a restaurant, and while we were waiting to order, we started eating the leftovers from the party at the table next to us. And my wife Chris and Andy's wife Carol believe they are the world's greatest cooks because every meal they ever served him was the greatest meal I've ever had. No milkshake, you'd often hear, "You saved my life." Anytime, only 15 minutes, but 3 or 4 times a day, he could nap laying down, sitting up. He one time got poison ivy from napping against a tree. I could probably say this is one thing I inherited from him. His garden was big. Lots of you comment on his garden and how much you loved his yard. And he loved salvaging unwanted plants that people found or gave him and watching them thrive in his yard. He even salvaged the neighbor's driveway, concrete driveway, and had my cousin Mark turn it into a garden wall. Gotcha, Mark. I tried to explain to him that pruning is like grief. New beautiful things can grow out of it. He wasn't happy. He also had what I call a big sense of justice. It's important to understand that while care and kindness was one of those things he preached, practice was sometimes hard. And I don't ever think that he was mean, but he could have a temper sometimes. And he wasn't afraid of a confrontation if he felt he was standing up for something he believed in. I once had a bike stolen, so we drove around the neighborhood looking for the bike, and we found it on a lawn a few blocks away. As we got out of the car, a man bigger than my dad came out of the house and confronted him. They exchanged a few colorful words as I scrambled to grab the bike and throw it in the trunk. We came out safely. Gary for all the details. I think it ended up with my dad yelling, "Banzai!" at some drunk neighbors in the middle of the night. And one involving the Crystal Cathedral was where there was a homeless person at the church who the police were chasing, who my dad found first and was praying with when the police arrived. My dad refused to stop praying and ended up getting arrested himself, cuffed and booked at the police station, and I think was on probation for a year. I started counting the other day, and I stopped counting at 45 Bibles in their house, and I missed 2 rooms. He wrote 7 books, and he also wrote a regular column in a magazine called The Banner. Unfortunately, I know for me, sometimes our family was the topic of a number of those stories, which had caused me a fair amount of embarrassment in high school and college. And the books are just the tip of the iceberg. Some of the family was over in our garage today, and there are stacks and stacks and stacks of notebooks and binders. He saved everything he ever wrote. After his brother Woody died, he once wrote 70 stories and 70 nights about their childhood adventures together. For everybody else. I can't tell you how many times I stood impatiently next to him in a line at the grocery store while he struck up a conversation with the cashier, or at the drive-thru, paused to compliment the lady's beautiful smile, or learned the whole life story of a waiter while we impatiently waited to order, or waited after one of our kids' soccer games because he just had to find number 8 from the other team and tell her how fast and tough she was. Opening presents, we smelled smoke, and we got outside, and the house around the corner was burning. As we watched the fire department do their job, all the other neighbors trickled back to their house to hearing kindness from all time. You can't imagine a person who better lived out through 25, 35. He always told me the Korean dry cleaning lady was his best friend. Our neighbor Helio from down the street in Bellflower became one of his closest companions the last 20 years, and Daddy became his sponsor in becoming a U.S. citizen. When we lived in Grand Rapids and he worked at Pine Rest Psychiatric Hospital, and I questioned the legality of this, he used to bring patients home to our house for Sunday dinner. We all especially remember our favorite Dwayne. And we faithfully picked up the Vietnamese refugee family and brought them to church every Sunday morning. There was an infamous collapsed treehouse. We jumped off our roof into snowdrifts, and I just heard a story a couple weeks ago that he once put on a clown mask and climbed a ladder to peek in the bathroom window while my siblings took baths, and that he scared them so bad, Andy still won't talk about it. Because to me, the greatest thing about him is that he saw all of life as a big adventure, and every mishap, mistake, or even tragedy were like compost or the boll weevil, opportunities to turn garbage into gold, or at least an interesting story. And last but certainly not least, his marriage to my mom was big, 63 years. They met our dad for calling too late the first time. He truly loved and admired my mom. They were a bit of an odd couple. He was the big loud jock, and she was the little quiet, at least she says she used to be quiet, musician. But they truly admired each other. She loved the way he could interact and talk to anyone. He loved carrying her cello to an event or watching her play the piano. They both appreciated a good fight from time to time, but only one involved leaving a moving vehicle. But they truly loved each other, and it grew into true partners in ministry. Mom mostly rolled her eyes at his jokes,